Hi, folks. Coming to you from the Humble Harv Memorial Virtual Broadcast Center in beautiful Mojave County, Arizona. This is military science fiction writer H. Paul Honsinger with yet another edition of Coffee and or Beer with the Author. This is the July 26, 2018 edition. Today we are having beer. It's Dos Equis. It's not half bad. And I invite you to take the beverage of your choice and sit down and have a conversation with me. It'll be a little one-sided, but you can reply in comments, and there's a good chance that I'll say something about the comment in a future video. I'll wait. All right, you've had time to pause the video and do that. So today what I'm going to do is answer some questions from some, I almost said listeners, but questions from readers. I have some really well-informed, intelligent readers. Imagine that, reading my stuff. And they've propounded to me some very interesting questions. And so I'm going to share some of those with you and provide what I hope are satisfactory answers. Unfortunately, for those of you who find the reflections distracting, this requires that I put on my glasses. So, sorry, I don't have non-reflective glasses, and I need them to see. So this first set of questions is from a fan whose name is Carolyn Byers. By the way, you send questions to me. You are consenting to my using your name on the air, so to speak. Who's a really outstanding fan. She and her husband are big cosplayers. They like to dress up as people from the Manticorian Navy, which is in those books about, what is her name? The chick who wears the white beret and has the cat around her shoulders. Can't seem to remember. Anyway, that's the disadvantage of being of advanced age, as I am. Anyway, she propounds or asks, you can tell I'm an old lawyer because I say propounds, not a word that normal people use, a few interesting questions. And I'm going to start with hers, and then if we still have some time, we'll look at some questions from another one of my outstanding fans. The first question she asks is, what educational process is there for everyone other than midshipmen? Medical school, specialty training, do women and girls get any schooling, etc.? That's a reasonable question given the fact that I really haven't told people in the books much about what's going on at home. Everything focuses on what's going on the USS Cumberland. Back home, I invite you to think of the Union as being much like the United States in World War II. A large portion of the nation's resources and human power are tied up in the war, but there are a lot of people who are just going about their lives. There are people who are unsuited to military service. There are people who, for one reason or another, can't be involved in the military. Either they really don't want to do it, or, like I said, they're physically or mentally unsuited to do it. The Navy only takes people who are in the upper echelons of intelligence. I believe in the glossary to the books I mentioned that you have to be in the 85th percentile or higher in order to be accepted to be an enlisted person. Plus, there are a lot of people who are in strategic occupations who simply can't be in the armed forces, such as in World War II. My grandfather, Harvey Paul Honsinger, same name as me, was of military age, but because he was running a strategically important oil field in Texas, he was exempt from the draft because they needed him to move the oil from under the ground in Barbers Hill, Texas, to into the pipelines and on the trains to make the war run. So things are going on as normal for just about everybody except the people who are in the Navy. So normal schooling proceeds. There is whatever the educational system is like in the Union in the 24th century, which is going to vary significantly from planet to planet because each individual planet has a fairly high degree of autonomy. I imagine on Earth, they're going to have something fairly similar to the educational system that we have here in the United States and Great Britain and in most other developed countries, where you have an elementary school, a sort of a middle age school, and then some sort of thing that looks like high school. Then people can proceed to trade schools or to a university education, which can then lead to careers in medicine, law, or other professions that require advanced degrees. So those things are going on pretty much as you would expect in any developed country, and the opportunities for women are exactly the same as they are for men. There has been equal rights for all genders in the legal system of every part of the human occupied space, or at least in the Terran Union. Can't speak for some of the other principalities because they have different systems, and some of them do not embrace equal rights for all, which is one of the reasons they're not in the Union. But everybody has opportunities to go to school, and women have the same opportunities as men. So there's nothing exceptional about the educational system for people who aren't in the Union Space Navy. The next question is, what path did adults take to become part of the military, those who were adults at the start of the war? Well, essentially, it doesn't look that much different from the path that one takes to get into the military now. You would essentially complete elementary school, middle school, and high school, and then you could seek admission to one of the officer training programs that universities would have, or service academies, become an officer and go in that way, or you could simply enlist at some point after getting out of high school. There are lots of people, a lot of people don't know this, but there are lots of enlisted people in the military of the United States, Great Britain, and other advanced countries who have master's degrees, often in the specialty in which they're serving. So there are people who are work in highly electronic-specific fields, who have degrees in electrical engineering. There are people who run logistics operations who have degrees in business and finance. So it would be very similar to the path that people take right now. Nothing exceptional. The war that mankind is currently in my books that began with the Krag attacked humanity, posed such an existential threat to the survival of mankind that a lot of things changed, and they changed very rapidly. So hence we have the midshipman system and other means of bolstering the manpower in the Union and providing better quality people to serve on the ships and to do other things that the Navy needs. Remember, in World War II, over 90% of the people who were in the Army were remotely exposed to combat. They were truck drivers, they worked in supply depots, they processed paper, they typed things. The military requires a large number of people who aren't out there at the point of the spear. Who works in the factories making uniforms and producing food if men are in the military and women are supposed to be having and raising babies? Well, there, like I said, are a large number of people. The overwhelming majority of men and women are not doing those things. The overwhelming majority of men are not suitable for military service. So they are in whatever occupation they would be in. A lot of the others who are suitable for military service are deliberately excluded because they have skills that are more needed in the civilian economy. If you run a major mining concern and are responsible for getting ton after ton after ton of titanium ore out of asteroids in some system, they're not going to take you out and stick you in a starship somewhere pushing buttons. You need to be in that mine producing strategic materials that the Navy's going to use to make into ships. So the overwhelming majority of the civilian economy is going along as a civilian economy mobilized for war. And as far as all of the women being involved in making babies, etc., well, as I said in my last video, to which you should refer because these two videos connect together very tightly, there are a lot of women who survived the gynophage. The gynophage killed 50% of the female human population in the galaxy. That leaves 50%. And that was about 20 years ago. The female population has recovered significantly since then. The post-gynophage female babies are now in their late teens and early 20s. And so these people are fulfilling roles in the civilian economy, doing what they would otherwise be doing in many cases. Next question. Is there some other means of, or is there other means, if I could talk, this would be really interesting. Or is there some other means of production relating to the previous questions? Well, obviously, in the 24th century, means of producing industrial goods, agricultural goods, uniforms, weapons are going to be substantially advanced beyond those that we have now. They're going to be substantially less labor intensive. There's going to be a lot more automation and a lot more robotics, but a starship cannot assemble itself. The individual components may be able to be assembled by robotics, and there may be some ability to put them together with robotics, but human beings are going to have to be involved in putting the thing together and making sure the pieces work together, and then making sure that the whole systems operate and everything is as it should be. So there's still going to be thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people involved at each of the major shipbuilding companies actually building the ships, and still more thousands of people helping put the component parts together. Yes, there will be more automation. Yes, it will be less labor intensive, but there will still have to be a lot of people involved in manufacturing. Agriculture, I expect, is going to be very highly automated by that time. You're not going to need people to drive combines to bring in the wheat or the corn or the rice. You're not going to have people drive planting machines or have people doing a lot of the other, flying crop dusters, spraying chemicals on the crops. Those functions will all be automated. There's no reason why drones can't be crop dusters. There's no reason why a combine can't be automated. In fact, there are some that are automated now. They use GPS to navigate around the field. They program in the pattern that they're supposed to steer, and they harvest the field, going up and down the rows until they get to the end, and then they stop, and then they send you a text message that says, "Hey, I'm done. What do you want me to do now?" So agriculture is certainly going to be much more highly automated than it is now, but there's still going to need to be people to program the machines. There's still going to need to be people to maintain the machines. There's still going to have to be people supervising the whole operation, making sure that everything is done in the right order and in the right way. I don't think computers are ever going to fully replace human decision-making, and there is a lot of human decision-making involved in agriculture, because I don't care how far we've advanced, we are never, ever, I believe, going to be able to accurately tell whether it's going to rain in a particular location 60 days from now. They're not going to be able to tell you that it's going to be raining at 4 in the afternoon 60 days from now. We're not going to be able to tell you accurately 6 months in advance whether this particular farm plot is going to receive 4.5 inches of rain, or 6.2 inches of rain, or 8.7 inches of rain. We can say that on average it's about 6.2, and we can say that this is looking like it's probably going to be a wet year, so we're going to estimate 7. And we might be plus or minus 1 standard deviation of our estimate 85% of the time, which is pretty good. But I don't think we're ever going to be able to tell a farmer certainly exactly what's going to happen in terms of the weather over and around his crops. And so there's always going to be a judgment call. Do I plant now or do I plant next week? Do I start the harvest now when the grain is a little wetter and spend more money on drying, thereby risking it being outside for another week or could possibly be rained and hailed on? Or do I go ahead and harvest it now? These are all judgment calls, and statistics and science can advise you, but eventually you have to look at the odds yourself, and a human being is going to make a decision. Next question, and this is, God, you should sit in the lounges where the presenters at these conventions, at these science fiction conventions sit, and listen to people talk about this subject. It is extremely controversial. What is your stance on people writing fanfic? And for those people who aren't in the know, that's fan fiction in your universe. There may be people who are old fuddy-duddies like me who don't know much about fandom, who don't know what fanfic is. I had to actually think about it the first time I read it. What do I think about fan fiction in my universe? Like I said, this is a controversial subject. My publisher will tell you that it is absolutely streng verboten. You do not do it. You can't do it. Don't you dare even think about it. Or the hand of God or Amazon will smite you dead and turn everyone in your family into pillars of salt. Now, I'm not of that view at all. I am very much against you writing fan fiction in my universe and making money off of it. It's my universe. It's my characters. I own the rights to them. Just like CBS owns Star Trek and Captain Kirk and Mr. Spock and Captain Picard and whoever's on that dang new show that I don't watch because everybody says it bites. So I own these things, and you can't go out and make money off of them without my express consent. And I'm not going to give it to you unless you give me a significant fraction of the money. I'm just, really that way, or sensible in terms of protecting my rights and the time and effort I spend in creating all this stuff. On the other hand, I have absolutely no problem with fan fiction that fans write for themselves, that they post on the internet, that they pass around to one another, that they do it for fun. There are people who get all exercised about that. I do not. I don't think it hurts me in the least. In fact, I think it's beneficial. Gets people thinking about the franchise, gets people talking about it. Somebody might read fan fiction in my universe who's never read the stuff I've written, and then say, well, maybe this writer sucks, but the universe is really very interesting, so hey, I'm going to go check out the real guy. So I don't have any problem. If you want to write fan fiction, go ahead and write fan fiction. Send me copies. I'll love to see it. Just as long as everybody understands, and you should say in a disclaimer at the beginning that this is fan fiction, it is not pre-approved by the author. It may reflect events that develop differently in the author's own writing. This is not canon, as fans like to say, and a term that came into being. People talked about Star Trek. So, right away, have fun. I created these things for the purpose of people having fun. I wanted people to imagine themselves in that CIC, on those ships, doing those things. I wanted to put you there. And if you are enough there that you can sit and write fiction about it, that you can put yourself there, pardon me. I get itchy noses every time I do these things. I suspect it's probably some sort of psychosomatic thing. Anyway, if you can put yourself there convincingly enough that you feel like you can write convincing stories set in this universe, knock yourself out. Just do not do it for commercial benefit. Or if you want to do it for commercial benefit, then talk to me about it in advance and we might be able to work a deal. So I encourage fan fiction. I think fan fiction is great for the franchise. I think that fan fiction is also a very good introduction for new writers because they don't have to create the characters. They don't have to create the universe. They can get to practice telling narratives. They can get to practice expressing characters and writing dialogue and trying to write dialogue that sounds like things that Dr. Sahin would say as opposed to things that Max would say and have them look different from one another. You should be able to look at any sizable piece of dialogue in a piece of fiction and know which major character is saying it. So you get to practice those skills without having to go through the difficulty of inventing all of the background. There are a lot of people who start out writing fan fiction who then transition into writing their own fiction. So I'm all for it, especially if it helps you. Next, she asked, in your video, you didn't really talk about what women are currently doing. You say they have equality and that they will come back to the Navy, but how do things work at home? You have the potential to go all Handmaid's Tale on this and make women solely about reproduction. I get the feeling that's not where you want to go. Clearly, that is not where I want to go. If women have equal rights, then certainly they cannot be compelled by law to engage in reproductive activities. You can't force them to say, hey, you are going to be a baby machine. Now, that is not to say that the government may not offer considerable incentives. Pay a baby bonus, give you tax benefits. Say if you have more than 4 children, you are completely exempt from income tax. Or we'll pay you 10,000 credits for every child that you deliver, or something like that. Which I don't think is morally objectionable because it's a purely voluntary action. If you don't want the money, don't have the baby. If you don't have the baby, you don't get the money. People will make a choice. And so there may be some kind of incentive system. We actually have something like that now to a lesser degree with the child care credits and the deductions that you have for each person in your family and stuff like that on federal income tax in the United States. But there will certainly be no reproductive compulsion. No one's going to be made to be a handmaid. And remember, with 50% of the female population surviving, and with there being this huge demographic hole in terms of women between age X and age Y, and there being the sudden reduction in population, all this space, all this housing, all these job opportunities, history shows that these kinds of demographic holes tend to be filled in very quickly by voluntary action of human beings. I think it was said when Lewis and Clark first explored the American West, I think Thomas Jefferson said something like it would take 20 generations before we would be able to fill the continent. It took 3. People have a way of making more people when there's space and opportunity and food and resources for more people. So I don't think it's going to be any problem. I don't think it would require any great draconian measures. And there may be people or some planets that avail themselves of in vitro fertilization to increase fertility, or they may not. They may not need to. My point is that it's not going to take any kind of totalitarian-like compulsion to restore the population such that 50 years after the gynophage, populations will be very close to where they were before. And 100 years after, demographics will be exactly as they were. Because that whole will have progressed out of the living population of those people who died. Are women running a lot of the government? But we don't see it because we are just dealing with the Navy. I think I made reference in a few places. Judith Bernard is referred to, I think, as the foreign minister or secretary of state or some such thing, which is a very high office in that government. And Max remarks that she has enough guts, shall we say, to supply them for the rest of the entire government. So there are a great number of women in public service, and they are also in positions of leadership throughout society. Much as they are in modern society, except that there will have been, instead of a few generations of roughly equivalent opportunity for both genders, there will have been, or for all genders, I should say, there will have been centuries. And there will have been a culture of widespread acceptance. There's still old guys, I've practiced law with some of these people. These old guys who say, I don't know about these female lawyers. They never seem to have ability to focus on real issues in the case. And then they always wind up getting pregnant after you've had them at the firm for 5 years and want to take a year off. It just doesn't work. People like that. All those old dinosaurs will have become extinct. They will have moved on. Everyone will have grown up in a world where equality for women is as normal as air. It's just there. It's just basically wired into society. Like I said in the last video, it's like the Third Amendment to the U.S. Constitution. It's so basic, it's so fundamental, that no one wonders or worries now about the government ordering troops in people's homes. It's just not a problem. Let's see. Are they holding offices? Yes. Are they working in the factories? Yes. Yes, clearly. They're doing whatever the hell they want to do and are qualified to do. Are all men in the Navy? No, absolutely not. Most men are not suitable for naval service. I wish I knew why this nose itches so much. If not, how are they chosen? Well, if you want to be in the Navy, you can apply. And you will be tested to see if you meet the intellectual criteria. You will be physically examined and tested to see if you meet the physical criteria. And if so, then you'll be put in training. You'll essentially become a midshipman or a greenie recruit and be sent off to space. But you have to meet the criteria, and most men will not. There are a lot of people who are going to be plenty smart enough, but will be turned away because they aren't physically strong enough, physically fit enough, because they have physical defects. I have a series of minor birth defects that basically precluded me from serving in the United States military. I do fine. I can do almost anything. I used to run 3 miles a day and do whatever the heck I wanted, but feet a little too small, arches a little too high, heart a little bit out of doing what it's supposed to do, things just not quite right. No, we don't need you. And so there will be a lot of people who appear to be perfectly physically fit, who can do basically whatever they want in the civilian world, who you're not going to want in the Navy, where people are going to be subjected to extreme physical stress, people who may have to perform under extreme physical conditions. My husband and I are huge cosplay fans. We would really love to cosplay a couple from your universe. Can you tell us more details of the uniforms and of civilian wear? Well, you got me there. I know in detail the layout of the CIC, of the Cumberland, and of the ship that will be used in the next novel. I know the layout of the weapons panels and what the skipper's displays look like, and all sorts of details like that. But as far as what the clothing looks like, what the uniforms are like, I only had really a very vague notion. The uniforms as depicted on the covers of the books were in fact designed by a gifted costume designer whose name escapes me right now. She did them for Jean Molica, who painted the covers, did the cover illustrations. And I think those are pretty good as the dress uniforms. The uniform that is described in the most detail is the space combat uniform, which is, as I mentioned, sort of a jumpsuit with lots of pockets and footies and various bulges around for an oxygen generator and other life support gear. And there's a pocket for a zip-on helmet and pockets for zip-on gloves so that you can use it as an emergency pressure suit. And I said it looks like sort of a shotgun marriage between kitty pajamas and a jumpsuit. And then there's the basic jumpsuit that people wear on ship most of the rest of the time. That looks like basically any other service jumpsuit that you're accustomed to seeing people wear on U.S. submarines. Like, that's a very good model. So if you want to cosplay people from my universe, I think you have a very wide range in which to create your own look. So you decide what you think the space combat uniform looks like, or the jumpsuit, or whatever. This is not something that has really held my attention. It's not something I really care a lot about, that I'm really interested in. Now, if we were producing a television series, then it would be different. I'd involve myself to the greatest extent that they let me in helping develop the look, because I don't necessarily know what things are going to look like, but I know the visual impression I want to create. And maybe I can tell you about that. The visual impression I want to create essentially is functionality. This is a Navy that values function above form in all things. They are fighting for humanity's survival. Anything that does not advance that is going to get dropped. It's going to go away. You don't need it. We're not going to have it. There has been a very profound observation, I can't remember by whom, that in almost any war you can predict the winner simply by the uniforms. The side that has the simpler uniform, the more basic, the more utilitarian uniform is going to win. One that has the snazziest, best-looking uniform with the most frou-frou and gewgaws, and it looks really, really, really cool, they will lose the war. Why? Maybe because this uniform is a symptom of an army or a military force that cares more about appearances than function. When you're fighting for humanity's survival, function is king. So functionality, practicality, simplicity should be your watchwords in designing a uniform or a look or anything that you are going to do that operates visually in the man of war universe, because everything else is gone by the wayside. As far as what civilians are wearing, I have not the vaguest clue. I have not given any thought to that whatsoever. So, who knows? I know very little about fashion. I know what I like, especially on females. I'm a red-blooded heterosexual fellow who likes a certain look, and there are things that appeal to me greatly and things that don't appeal to me, and no, I'm not going to tell you what they are. But that's about all I know about fashion. And so, if I were to tell you that women tend to wear mid-length A-line skirts and dresses with a blouse with a chemise that has a sort of Parisian blah blah blah. Yeah, I don't know any of that stuff. Knock yourself out. Have fun. If you want to dress as a civilian from the 24th century in the Man of War universe, you have a free palette upon which to draw. Just don't make it look silly or ridiculous. I think a lot of the fashions people wore on the Star Trek shows were just silly. They were absurd. I can't imagine sensible, intelligent, advanced people wearing that stuff. I mean, some of those things with the, cross straps holding the female's accoutrements, looks like they have to be glued in place or they might escape. How's someone supposed to walk across the room wearing something like that unless you've got the stuff super glued in? It's ridiculous. So if you're going to do something, don't make it look silly, okay? Yes. Pretty, attractive, reasonable, futuristic, unusual, different, great. I think that's all illustrative and wonderful, and if no one can tell you, they would not be wearing that in the 25th century, or the 24th century. That's ridiculous. That's impossible. It's like people who write to me and say, they couldn't recruit the way you do. There's no way that officers and enlisted men would be trained together, and then that midshipmen would become enlisted men instead of all becoming officers. It's like, who the hell are you to tell me what I can and can't do in my Navy in the 24th century? They'll do it the way I say they're going to do it. And you can't tell me, you can't pull out a 24th century naval training manual and say, Honsinger, you're wrong, because you can't do that. It's my Navy. They do what I do, and what I say they do, and the way I say they do it is reasonably plausible. And that's all it has to be, is reasonably plausible. The way my recruiting works does that way because it lets me tell a certain kind of story. It helps me tell the stories that I want to tell. And if you want to have a Navy where midshipmen cannot become enlisted men, then you've got a computer, write your own dang novel. Have fun. Send me a draft. I can't wait to see it. Or get it published. I can't wait to read it. But don't tell me what I can and cannot do as far as making the rules for my own Navy. Now, it's certainly reasonable to say this is not plausible because it would have this practical implication or problem that you may have not considered. Maybe so. I'm not perfect. I'm not a genius. I can't foresee all consequences. If I were a perfect genius and could foresee all consequences, I would be certainly more wealthy than I am now. But anyway, as to cosplay, civilian outfits, have fun. Enjoy yourself. Make whatever you want. As long, again, as it's reasonably plausible and is not silly. If it's silly, I'm going to tell you, and you ask me, of course, if you ask my opinion, I will tell you, beautiful, but I think it looks silly. So I've taken up 37 minutes and 19 seconds of your time and counting. We're not going to get to the other individuals' questions, but that just leaves more for next time. I expect to be back in front of you in about a week, so remember to keep your small children away from the computer. They could suffer trauma from seeing my face. You don't want to scare the young ones. And I hope you have a wonderful life and enjoy yourselves. Have lovely trips into your imagination and enjoy everything you do between now and then. Have a good day.